Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jan Szrewicki. Former Polish Justice Minister Zbigniew Ziobro, facing serious charges of misconduct, was granted political asylum by the government of Viktor Orban, straining relations between the governments in Warsaw and Budapest. Is the Hungarian administration using asylum rights for political gain, as some NGOs have actually said recently? Joining us here to discuss this is Jakub Jaraczewski, Research Coordinator at Democracy Reporting International. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So let's begin with the legal status of Mr. Ziobro. While in Hungary, what sort of benefits does he actually gain from this decision of the Orban government? Is this effectively a kind of immunity from prosecution? From prosecution, or is there more to it in legal terms?
So, legally speaking, we don't know yet exactly what kinds of protection Mr. Ziobro and his spouse, Ms. Patrycja Kotecka, have been granted, because Ziobro has not released any official documents confirming his status, and neither has the Hungarian government. But we can have some suspicions that he was granted asylum. Now, receiving asylum in Hungary, as of now legally, is in theory very difficult. Hungary has in 2020 introduced a complicated system where one person who wants to seek asylum in the country must first visit a Hungarian embassy in either Kyiv, Ukraine, or Belgrade, Serbia, and there initiate the procedure. This system, called the embassy system, which has been introduced by the Hungarian government to restrict the access to asylum and to make it in particular difficult for foreigners to seek, has been criticized and has been found actually to violate EU law by the Court of Justice of the European Union in 2023. However, unsurprisingly, there is a backdoor to this system where the Minister of Interior of Hungary may grant asylum to an applicant who does not follow this procedure in special particular cases. So this is something what we could be looking at here in the case of Mr. Ziobro. Now, the Hungarian government has a history of using the asylum procedure for political purposes. In 2018, Hungary has granted asylum to the former North Macedonian president Nicolae Gruevski, who was sought in the country on charges related to corruption and abuse of power. So this might be following a pattern of instrumentalization of asylum for the political gain of Viktor Orban and his allies abroad.
Especially given that the relations there are already strained. I mean, it is impossible to overlook the question of political affiliations. The former minister was close to the Orban government. I mean, the government in Poland back then considered Budapest to be a major ally in the many debates that they have with the European Union. Now, following the change in Warsaw, this dynamic has shifted quite significantly. Do you think we might be seeing another shift if the elections in Hungary result in Mr. Orban essentially being removed from the position of Prime Minister and with a new government being formed in Budapest?
Yes, the question, what will happen if in the upcoming parliamentary election the government in Hungary will change, is very interesting in this context. Peter Magyar, who leads the opposition party TISA, that is currently heading in the polls and is very much aiming to upset and oust Viktor Orban and Fidesz, has been for a long time claiming that his country will be open to cooperation with the European Union and will not be following Viktor Orban's policy of supporting like-minded parties abroad to this extent. So
and he criticized this decision on granting asylum, didn't he?
Yes, he did. So the question is, what will happen if the government in Hungary changes and if the Peter Magyar's administration would, for example, move forward towards cancelling the asylum for Zbigniew Ziobro, but also for his former deputy of Zbigniew Ziobro, Mr. Marcin Romanowski. So in some ways, this is a very risky move for Mr. Ziobro, placing so much bets on a single card of receiving support from Viktor Orban, which was kind of to be expected. However, also on Viktor Orban remaining in power after the upcoming parliamentary elections.
So now the two sides in Poland, they do actually exchange accusations. The government says the accusations against Mr. Ziobro are serious. There are 26 charges, I believe, related, among other things, to misappropriating public funds. And the amounts, again, are quite considerable. Now, on the other hand, Mr. Ziobro says, well, I cannot stay in the country because I will not be granted a fair trial. He says there is no impartiality right now, and the government is out to get him, to use the language that appears in statements from the current opposition. So which of these do you think carries more weight when it comes to arguments concerning what is happening right now?
So the charges against Zbigniew Ziobro, which have not yet been formally presented to him, and a hearing regarding his arrest will be held by a court in Warsaw in 2 days, if I'm not mistaken, are, from the reports that we're seeing, quite serious. They pertain primarily to the so-called Justice Fund, which was a budget line within the Ministry of Justice, which ostensibly was to be used to help support the victims of crime and to help initiatives meant to protect them. However, was in practice, from all reports that we've seen, used as a political slush fund of Zbigniew Ziobro and his closest associates and his political party, the Sovereign Poland. So those charges are serious, but in this case, I would also like to point out to the fact that perhaps not one of the charges of the prosecution, but one of the biggest issues with Zbigniew Ziobro was how he ran both the Ministry of Justice and Prosecutor's Office during the period in power. Those were the times of the escalation of the rule of law crisis in Poland, of limiting the independence of judiciary and of attacks on independent judges, but also of challenging the authorities of the European Union, of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and the European Court of Human Rights. Now, I doubt that those things are part of the charges that the prosecution is seeking, but those have been the fact that under the Ziobro's period in power, the rule of law in Poland has deteriorated, and we've seen this reflected in various international judgments of courts and also indexes such as the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index. Well, I believe that Mr. Ziobro is entitled to fair trial. I also think that with the current situation of the rule of law in Poland, he would find such trial in Poland, notwithstanding all the remaining issues with the rule of law in the country. Now, I don't think that the argument of not having a fair trial would send much weight. Also worth pointing it out that some of the friends and allies of Mr. Ziobro from the previous government, such as former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, or Dariusz Matecki, a politician of the formerly ruling party PiS, stayed in the country and are facing charges from the prosecution, and they vow to defend themselves in Poland, and they have not raised insofar the argument that they would not have a fair trial in the country.
So generally there seems to be a track record that a new government comes to power, serious accusations are launched against members of previous governments. In most cases, nothing really comes out of it. Now, do you think that the problem here is also that we're seeing rule of law being used as an instrument in political debate? We had a statement from Peter Siarto saying that rule of law in Poland is threatened. Now, Hungary would often balk at the European Union, saying there are problems with the rule of law in Hungary. Yet the same argument is now being used in relations between these two countries.
I think that the Hungarian foreign minister is perhaps one of the last people who should be talking about the rule of law in the country. The situation of the judiciary and of respect for human rights in Hungary has been arguably even worse than the one in Poland. And we have not seen any improvement outside of some isolated cases, which usually happen due to pressure from the European Union, primarily financial pressure. So this is pretty much two birds of a feather. The Hungarian authorities and Mr. Ziobro talking the same language, that this is politicization of the rule of law and this is abuse of prosecution for political purposes. However, at the end of the day, there are some standards that are common to everyone, and independent courts exist to validate whether the charges brought by the prosecution, whether the finding of the prosecutors are accurate and correct. I believe that we have those courts in Poland that could examine the charges against Mr. Ziobro correctly. I doubt that Hungarian legal system and Hungarian judiciary, which has been pretty much taken over by Viktor Orban completely, would provide this kind of guarantee.
Do you think there is a risk of further political escalation? There is an ongoing trial of Marine Le Pen in France, and the Trump administration has already criticized that trial, saying this is an attempt to effectively cancel a political option in France. Do you think there is a risk that this case could actually be used in a similar way, and that we might be seeing criticism coming from the US concerning the way that this investigation is being conducted?
That is possible, of course, and we have seen a pattern of Donald Trump's administration criticizing various attempts to enforce law abroad in various contexts, not only criminal charges against politicians, but also, for example, attempts to regulate big tech companies and so on. However, I doubt that those such statements will move beyond the fields of rhetoric. It is worth noting that Donald Trump's administration is quick to criticize courts when it disagrees with their judgments, but is quick to praise them if the judgments and rulings are aligned with Donald Trump's policy, such as what we've seen recently from the American Supreme Court. So, for some people, of course, this argument will hold water, but in general, it seems like a quite opportunistic approach to the rule of law and supporting those judgments and courts that you agree with and criticizing those that you don't agree with.
Jakub Jaraczewski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Minash Rawiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.